All right, welcome to another great episode of The Rundown. I'm Sunny Galt. I'm a messenger with United Network News, and we are the news division of United Network. We're also part of CARE, the Center for Amity and Restoration of Earth. And our mission is to bring you the real news. So the real news is truth, right? What is really going on locally in our states, in our countries, globally, even throughout the multiverse. So we have a pretty broad scope of things, but then we can also narrow it down too. And our mission is just to share with you what's really happening, because that's how you make educated choices in life. And if you're just getting nonsense from mainstream media, if you're just getting nonsense, even from alternative media, because most of those sources, even though the people are usually, that have their own shows on alternative media, they usually have a good heart, but they're getting their information from sources that are tainted. Okay, well, what if you just got your information directly from the source? That is what we do. And we are not politically based, so I don't care, if you are liberal or conservative or whatever, that the whole system is corrupt in our point of view based on what we see and what we know. And so it's really about humanity coming together and supporting one another and saying, we're not going to take this anymore. And to stop with the labeling and the name calling and I'm a this and you're a that, that doesn't help anybody. So we need to tear down those walls and really stand united, which is why we're United Network News, and stand against a common enemy that we have. And this really is a battle of good versus evil. So welcome to the show. If you are new, if you just heard about us, or maybe someone is sharing this podcast with you for the first time, you are in for a treat, because the stuff you hear on United Network News, you are not going to hear everywhere else, because they are not getting their information directly from the source. And with this particular show, so this is a week in review podcast. I try to go over some of the top stories that we've covered over the last week, and it's a great way to get caught up on stories you may have missed. Or like I said, if you want to share this episode with someone because you think it would benefit them, maybe introduce them to UNN, that would be great. With everything, we encourage you guys to think critically and to ask questions. Do your own research. Just, gone are the days we're just going to believe someone because they happen to be a celebrity or they have their own show. Don't do that anymore. Okay. That's what got us into this problem, is just believing people because they appear to have authority. But the problem is, if that authority does not have your best interest at heart, then what are you going to do? Right? You're just going to believe the lies. And unfortunately, that's kind of what's happened for all of us. We're all kind of in that same boat, waking up and realizing that the world is not what we thought it was. So if that describes you, you are in the right place. All right, let's get started. Here's the rundown of stories you may have missed this week on UNN. Let's kick things off with our field messenger report. So our field messengers are everyday people like you that are recording what's going on in their community. They send us the footage, they give us the background behind the story, and then we have an incredible team of producers and editors that put the information together and then edit it together, and we put it up on the news. So you don't have to have a big fancy reporter background or anything like that. We just want you guys sharing what's honestly happening in your area. We believe this is the best way to break down walls, to break down these crazy narratives that they're telling us that we have to believe. Oh, this is happening in this area, this is happening in that area. By the way, one of those narratives, I don't think the stories have aired yet, but it got broken down through our field messengers, and that is the LA riots. So from what I can tell at this point, based on reporting from our field messengers, there were some major things going on in the first couple days, but then it dramatically dropped down. And we're talking about really only within I don't know, 5 or 6 blocks did it ever get bad. But if you had watched any mainstream media channel, right, they would have said, oh, fire and brimstone and all of LA is on fire. That's why our field messengers are so important, because we can have people go out in their backyard and say, guys, this is what they're saying, but that's not happening. And I'm not suggesting that things didn't get bad with the LA riots, but it wasn't as drawn out as they made it seem, right? And it's because of you guys. You guys, we believe you're the news. You're the newsmakers, right? So you tell us what is actually going on, and we'll share it with the world. All right, let's get to the stories that we released this week. So Amanda, who is based out of Tasmania, because we're not just focused on the U.S., we're focused on everything around the world. She takes us to the Tasmania wilderness, which I thought was fascinating. I've been to Australia before. I've never made it as far as Tasmania, but apparently it can be a hiker's paradise. And from the video, this is one of those things you really need to see. She shows us these incredible mountains, beautiful flora, these just gorgeous exotic flowers that were blooming. And then you've got these Dolomite mountains in the background. It is a natural wonderland. So if you want to check out Tasmania and everything this wilderness area of Tasmania has to offer, then make sure you check out Amanda's report. Wayne he's out of Arizona, but he's right on the border of Arizona and Mexico. So he did kind of more of a news-focused topic, and he takes a lot of trips to Mexico. And we have been told that now if you cross over into Mexico, you need to have visas prepared. And what he found is, at least in his travels, he did not need to have any kind of visas to cross over into Mexico. He did say that it was a little bit more tricky getting back from Mexico into the U.S., but he was able to make it work despite media reports. There's a lot of hype around all of this, and they're not letting us travel, and obviously immigration is a really big topic right now. And so can't always believe what you're seeing on mainstream media. Veronica and Emma are out of Norway, and they talk about some of the issues they're having with egg recalls over there. I feel like this is something that everybody in the world has been, hit up with at some point. And so they talk about how government regulations have affected the supply and demand for eggs, which has led to empty shelves, higher prices. We've all kind of been through this, right? They talk a little bit about things that have happened recently. So they said in 2022, the government actually paid people to cut back on egg production. So the people that had the chickens, they paid them to not have their eggs or not have their chickens produced. I'm not really sure how that works, but if you can cut back on that, they paid people to. And then they said in 2023, they were going through and crushing the eggs that they could tell. They were sorting the eggs based on gender, and they were crushing the eggs so they were no longer viable for male chickens. So you just had female chickens. Obviously, if you don't have enough male chickens, they can't fertilize the eggs. So we're back to, eggs and having chickens, right? They claim they did that because there was too much vitamin D, or this may have been another reason or another issue they were having, is that there was too much vitamin D in the feed that they were feeding the chickens. So they had to go through and slaughter all these chickens. I mean, honestly, how many excuses are you going to have? It really doesn't make a lot of sense. But they also said that the upside to this is that people started buying directly from local farmers, which we are huge advocates for here. So there was an upside. All right, Cherie from Uganda talks about Uganda's youth population and how they're kind of facing some challenges now. One is how they're going to make ends meet, so how they're going to make some money. And a common way to do that is to promote loans. So here in the West, we think of loans like you go into a bank or whatever. It's much different in places in Uganda. So depending on what kind of loan you want, as I understood the story, the person that sold it to you would get a portion of that or a percentage of that or somehow get some sort of commission. And it's been very difficult for them to do this. And the rules are a little tricky, and, sometimes the kids can go for a really long time without getting paid. So he basically just sheds light on this whole situation and some of the struggles that the young people are going through. All right, Amy out of Connecticut. This is a fun story. Have you ever heard of a show called Treehouse Masters? I actually had to look this up. So this was on Animal Planet. And if you go to YouTube, there's a bunch of videos and you can check it out. But I was watching this for a while. It was really interesting. So this was a show, and there was a designer. His name is Pete Nelson. And this was his show that he had for several years. Now, it's been a while since the show has, had new episodes. But the reason it ties into Amy is because she went to one of the tree houses that I believe was part of this show. Now, when I say tree house, okay, this is not like a little kid tree house, that a dad put together. Okay, this is like almost a house. Like, think, what was that? The Swiss Family Robinson tree? Kind of think something like that, but more posh and elegant. So they can do amazing things now. So if you want to check that out, yeah, it kind of made me want to have a tree house. I'm not kidding. Rosemary from Australia takes us to these indigenous birthing pools in an area where she was at. She says for generations, birthing pools have offered indigenous women a serene place for childbirth. Probably much better than a screaming hospital, right? Hospital with like people screaming, babies screaming, all that kind of stuff. So we basically went to Gympie, which is in Queensland, Australia, and they were kind of trekking through the forest for a while. And I was like, wow, this is kind of a big trek. Can you imagine being in labor, going on a little hike to get to where you're going to give your baby? I don't know. Maybe it helps push the baby out. Who knows what they did back then? But beautiful area, very natural, and these gorgeous, we're calling them pools, but they're, little bodies of water, so to speak, and nestled in with rocks and things like that. A very natural place to give birth, it seemed, and surrounded by jasper. I guess the rock, it kind of looked a little bit red, and they said that was the jasper in the rock. So kind of interesting history to know that all these women gave birth in these pools next to where you're at. All right, Itamar from Israel introduces us to a local artist who shares her art, but it really displays consciousness through art. So this woman, she's extremely creative, and she's using her tool or her art to promote positive change. So again, this is another story that you really kind of need to see, because you need to look at the artwork. She explains the artwork and how she's trying to reveal things through her art. It's very beautiful. Lawrence out of New Mexico talks a little bit about hydrogen therapy. So molecular hydrogen, it's very tiny, but it's also extremely powerful. It's an oxidant that targets harmful radicals in your body while leaving the good ones intact. And this is proven to be very helpful, for example, with cancer. One of the common issues with traditional methods of treating cancer is that you're killing the good stuff and the bad stuff. What if there was a way to just target the bad stuff and keep the good stuff? And so this is what they're exploring through hydrogen therapy. In fact, he says it's so small that it can enter the mitochondria. So if you think about how small mitochondria is, very small, then that's what this therapy is doing. And finally, we have Emma from Spain. And Emma introduces us to her mini trampoline. You know those little things you can bounce up and down on? It's really just made for one person. Well, she talks about how she uses this to have a healthy lymphatic system. She says it's a great way to boost energy, to tone your muscles, and to support your lymphatic system. And she basically jumps up and down on this, but does different things with her arms. I think she's got some rocks in her hands when she's doing this. It's a very simple workout. In fact, she admits that she's a little lazy. And so this is something that works for her. Probably like more of a traditional workout really wouldn't work, but this works for her, and she wanted to share it with our audience. So thank you, Emma. If you guys are interested in becoming field messengers and you want to learn a little bit more about what's expected, which isn't that much, it's like when a story happens, share it with us. But if you want more information, you can visit our website and look under field messengers. There's a whole section for that. We also have a Telegram group where you can chat with our producers and editors, and they can kind of help you with your story if you have any questions. All right, here are some of the news stories that the team and I worked on for you guys this week. So you may have seen some of these headlines out and about, but we really try to take more of a deep dive with this and give you more of the backstory of what's going on. All right, so let's kick things off by talking about the U.S. shortage of skilled workers. So believe it or not, we have got a shortage here in the U.S. that is hitting industries pretty hard. Industries like construction and manufacturing, and businesses are struggling to fill essential roles. The issue traces back to the 2008 recession when many workers left the trade industries and then they never came back. And it's been made worse by early retirements, shifting priorities, and a lack of interest from younger generations. For years, schools have been moving away from teaching practical skills, and instead, they are pushing college degrees. And that shift in perception has discouraged many people from entering the trades.
All right, what would happen if all the skilled tradesmen actually disappeared one day? Poof, they're all gone. But guess what? Your lights wouldn't turn on. You wouldn't have fresh drinking water. No power, no Monday Night Football. Your roof would leak, bridges would fall into the sea, tunnels wouldn't blow, roads would be unpassable, even your car would break down. Basically, we'd be screwed. Maybe it's a little far-fetched. But how about this statistic? For every 7 to 8 skilled tradesmen retiring, only 1 tradesman is coming out of trade school. Do the math on that statistic. You have a trades gap of millions of jobs that really cannot be fulfilled. Let's promote the skilled trades for the younger generation in our schools. Otherwise, this may become a reality.
But change is happening. Employers and educators are creating hands-on programs like the Heavy Metal, I love this name, Heavy Metal Summer Experience and Skills USA to reintroduce students to skilled careers, giving them real-world experience and a head start in industries that need them now more than ever. Denmark's National Postal Service, PostNord, will stop delivering letters by the end of 2025 due to declining use and rising costs, resulting in around 1,500 job losses. While packages will still be delivered, the move hits hard for thousands of Danes who rely on physical mail for essential services like healthcare and banking, especially in rural areas.
The state-run PostNord agency has announced an end to letter delivery in Denmark. By the end of 2025, 1,500 to 4,600 staff will be made redundant, and during the second half of this year, circa 1,500 post boxes will be removed. Danish letter volume has dropped by 90% since 2000 AD, and it fell 30% during 2024 alone. The 400-year-old postal service will be restricted to parcel deliveries from the start of 2026.
The Danish government is stepping in with financial support, but concerns remain as private company Dow prepares to take over letter delivery, despite a track record of precarious labor and service issues. Critics are warning that privatizing such an essential service could lead to higher costs and poor access, especially for society's most vulnerable. Indonesia's economy is booming on paper, with a strong GDP growth, rising foreign investment, and a booming nickel industry, which is used for electric vehicles. But the country's middle class is quietly shrinking. That's what no one's talking about. Despite infrastructure gains and green energy potential, household consumption is slowing as wages lag behind inflation. And the cost of living continues to rise. Economic gains are increasingly concentrated amongst the wealthiest, leaving many Indonesians, especially women, youth, and urban families, struggling to keep up. In response, the government is launching a broad stimulus plan to ease financial pressure, but if the middle class continues to erode, Indonesia's long-term growth and social stability could be at serious risk. In May 2025, the USDA abruptly cut more than $1 billion in funding from two key programs. It's not being talked about a lot. The first program is Local Food for Schools, and second program, Local Food Purchase Assistance. And it is dealing a major blow to schools, food banks, and family farms across the U.S.
We're going to be losing a significant amount of food, nearly 6 million pounds. It's hard to imagine why these dollars were cut out of the budget.
You know, we spend an awful lot of money building these very fancy tanks and guns, but you can't eat a gun.
The USDA has cut $11 million in funding that food banks across North Carolina were expecting to receive in 2025. The money helps farmers supply fresh, local produce to food banks who then distribute it to people who can't afford groceries.
What we hear a lot about is the fiscal responsibility needs for the government. But what is fiscally responsible about taking food out of the hands of children who are in need and seniors and families in our community?
These initiatives had been helping schools serve healthier meals, boosting food access for families, and providing stable income for local farmers. Now, with the funding gone, schools are scrambling to afford fresh food, food banks are facing higher costs, and farmers are left without buyers for their crops. While existing contracts will continue until the money runs out, the future of local food systems and the communities they support is now at risk. Germany is facing a deepening housing crisis with more than 800,000 apartments in short supply and rent prices soaring, especially in cities like Berlin. Over half the population rents, and millions are now living in overcrowded or unaffordable conditions. The government is extending rent control laws until 2029, but without tightening loopholes that allow landlords to sidestep regulations, like charging inflated prices for temporary furnished rentals, many renters remain unprotected.
Berlin played around with this a little bit as well. So in those couple of years when Berlin implemented a price control, then the new constructions in the city plummeted. So supply was essentially almost non-existent because no new flats were being built. Because if you're a real estate developer, why would you want to build something where you have a cap on your profits and you just invest the same money in other more profitable areas?
While some tenants welcome the rent cap extension, critics argue it discourages new construction. And without meaningful reforms, the housing crunch will only get worse. Overtourism is putting pressure on some of the world's most beloved destinations, leading to overcrowding, environmental damage, and rising tensions with locals. While travel brings major economic benefits and cultural exchange, the surge in global tourism, which is fueled by budget travel, social media, and major events, has caused prices to soar, local housing to sink, and fragile ecosystems to suffer.
Mass tourism isn't just a problem for cities. It's also a huge threat to the environment. Some of the most fragile ecosystems in Europe are being devastated by excessive tourism. Take Santorini, for example. Every summer, cruise ships unload thousands of passengers onto the tiny island, generating tons of waste and putting enormous strain on limited resources like fresh water and energy. Similarly, in the Alps, overdevelopment for ski resorts and hiking trails is leading to deforestation, soil erosion, and destruction of native wildlife habitats. Beaches across Europe are also suffering. Places like the Amalfi Coast in Italy and the Balearic Islands in Spain are struggling with pollution caused by excessive tourist traffic, plastic waste, and even damage to coral reefs from sunscreen and boat anchors.
Protests have erupted in places like Spain's Canary Islands, while countries like Peru and Bhutan are fighting back with visitor limits, tourist taxes, and eco-friendly reforms. The good news? Travelers can help by making more mindful, respectful choices on the road. Europe is facing a major healthcare workforce crisis, with more than 1.2 million doctors, nurses, and midwives needed to meet growing demand, driven by both an aging population and a rapidly aging workforce.
Due to the incredibly low birth rate across the European Union, it is an undeniable fact that healthcare is declining as well. Fewer people are putting money into the pot, and we have fewer educated doctors than ever before. Europeans have to wait for months and sometimes even over 1 year for a doctor's appointment. It was nothing like it 15, 20 years ago when our healthcare system was intact.
Burnout, low pay, and difficult working conditions are pushing many professionals to leave the field or seek better opportunities abroad, further straining systems from Portugal to Germany. Countries like Bosnia, Bulgaria, and Croatia have seen thousands of workers exit, while nations like Slovenia and Germany struggle to fill gaps. Solving this won't be quick or easy. It'll take investment in education, better pay, improved conditions, and smart use of technology like telemedicine and perhaps AI. The West African coast, especially Senegal, is facing a serious crisis as foreign fishing fleets, primarily from the EU, exploit local waters through questionable joint ventures and loopholes. While EU treaties were meant to provide sustainable fishing and benefit local economies, investigative reports reveal widespread overfishing, reflagging of vessels, and poor enforcement of regulations.
Spain is under fire, accused of ignoring illegal fishing by its own fleet in West African waters. Environmental groups Client Earth and Oceana have filed a lawsuit in Madrid claiming Spanish authorities failed to act on repeated violations near Senegal and Guinea-Bissau. At least 8 Spanish vessels reportedly switched off their tracking systems, making their movements invisible at sea. That's a direct breach of EU rules, which requires constant monitoring to prevent illegal fishing.
This has devastated fish stocks, with Senegal's catch dropping 75% over the last decade, slashing incomes and sparking food insecurity and migration. NGOs have taken legal action against France and Spain for enabling illegal practices, while the EU has issued a yellow card to Senegal. With no renewed treaty in place, both sides blame each other, highlighting a longstanding need for better oversight, fairer practices, and protection of one of West Africa's most vital resources. Ghana's bold effort to provide free basic and secondary education has dramatically increased school enrollment and eased the financial burden on families. However, it hasn't guaranteed better learning. Since the 1990s, policies like the Free Compulsory Universal Basic Education, or FCUBE, and the Free Senior High School, or Free SHS program, have opened classroom doors to millions of Ghanaian students. Yet, overcrowded classrooms, resource shortages, and a lack of trained teachers have made it difficult to maintain education quality.
Ghana is a really unique country to study and think about early childhood education. It's been a pioneer on the continent in expanding 2 years of pre-primary education called kindergarten as part of the universal free basic education system in the country. So because this policy was rolled out in 2007, Ghana has made tremendous strides in increasing access to an enrollment in kindergarten education. The key issues the government is now grappling with is how to ensure that that education is high quality and that children are really learning and developing to their full potential by having access to early childhood education.
Studies show that while attendance is up, literacy and math skills have actually declined, especially in urban areas. The government has responded with initiatives like the National Education Consultative Forum and the double track system to manage rising demand, but concerns remain about long-term sustainability and student outcomes. Ghana's experience highlights a key lesson. Access is just the first step. Real success depends on ensuring every child not only shows up, but truly learns. All right, now it's time for some updates from the Global Intelligence Agency, and we do this through the GIA Report. Kim Gogan is the head of the GIA, and she usually gives us a few updates throughout the week. However, this was a bit of a crazy week, you guys. This was the week where the LA riots unfolded, and we had all the craziness that happened actually today. As I'm recording this, it was just a couple hours earlier in Washington, D.C. with the military parade. There were a lot of things planned that, at least at this time, doesn't appear that they came to fruition, but if the deep state had their way, it definitely would have. So we'll get a full report from Kim coming up here shortly, but let me break down her report from Monday and then also give you some of the quick text updates that she pushed out through Telegram this week. All right, so last week we were telling you about the Mormons getting involved with the Trump operatives, and the reason behind that is BlackRock. All roads lead back to BlackRock, you guys. So if you haven't listened to last week's episode, I encourage you guys to do that. Long story short, BlackRock stole a bunch of money from a bunch of people, but they really ticked off the Mormon church because not only did the church, not only were they using BlackRock for their funds, but also a lot of the members of the church and their businesses. And essentially, BlackRock was spending that money or giving that money to bad players, okay? A lot of the bad players coming out of the White House and the operatives and all the nasty stuff that they're trying to do to humanity right now, including wars and who knows what health-related virus things they're working on. They spent trillions and trillions of other people's monies, and now it is catching back up to them. The Mormon Church just being one group that is not happy that all of their money is gone. Okay, so the Inquisition went on. So last week we were telling you how the Mormons weren't happy and they were questioning the Trump operatives and probably all operatives over there as to what happened to their money. And we're going to take over the country because you guys have no idea what you're doing. And basically, the operatives then tried to fire up some stuff. First of all, they made up a bunch of excuses. Okay. Oh, yeah, we're going to do this. We're going to do that. And, we're going to, regain access to everything that we used to have, basically. They're just lies. They're just trying to extend the inevitable, which is they have no control over the country anymore, and they're freaking out about it. So when another group comes to you and says they're going to take over, of course, you're just going to make up lies about, how you're going to have control very soon, and they never do. But unfortunately, the Mormons gave them some extra time. And so what did the Trump operatives do with this extra time? Well, they decided to throw a big parade in Washington, D.C. this week. They decided to invest more in the riots in L.A., in an attempt to destroy the U.S. It's kind of like if we can't have the U.S., nobody can have the U.S. So let's break this down a little bit. I specifically want to talk about the riots in L.A., because that's been all over the news. We've been reporting on it a little bit in our news, but really just giving you more of the surface information. But I want to do a deep dive on this because Kim really goes into a lot more depth on the GIA report. But I have a soundbite that I want to play for you guys about the technology that very few people know about that was actually used to incite the riots in LA. So here's Kim.
Okay, so how do things like this happen? I mean, don't get me wrong. People are upset and they're angry. But why does it have to get out of hand like it is? In other words, people can get hurt. I know that they sent in the National Guard. People don't know at this point because they're sending in these henchmen into people's homes, raiding people's homes, hardworking, legally here citizens with no arrest record, no crime records, no nothing, and they're deporting them. So if someone sends a few 100,000, National Guard troops to your area, and all you know is that the henchmen are coming because that's what you've seen happen everywhere else, and it's not like these people don't talk and don't know everybody else, what do you expect them to do? But it has gotten a little bit rough and it has gotten a little out of hand. So they took an issue which is definitely an issue for a lot of people right now. A lot of spouses, a lot of people that have legally immigrated to this country and amplified that situation. How do they amplify a situation like this? Well, it's called voice-to-skull technology. Now, voice-to-skull technology isn't just for the skull. In part, it is. However, it can be conducted by any bones within your body. Therefore, it can affect your neurological signals to your spine. It can send frequencies directly to the skull and therefore the brain to make you feel a certain way, to make you do certain things, or to amplify anger or cause you to make decisions that maybe you wouldn't have made before. It can definitely cause riots in any other area in any human anywhere, and has many, many times over and over and over again. It also is where your go postal terms come from. People that were normal, average, everyday citizens, never did a thing wrong, didn't have any kind of record, or, normal working citizens, and turned them into killers. And this is how it's done, or how it was done, I should say, until this weekend. Now, the base root for this technology is an artificial intelligence technology, meaning it was never permitted for humans to utilize on this level the quote unquote voice to bone or voice to skull technology. Not on that level. On that level, they could actually cause illness. They could send frequencies to your bones and cause all kinds of cancers and all kinds of things. They can actually perpetuate wars. They can make wars on higher levels. They can shut you off and turn you on. Let's put it that way, on that level. However, why did they do it? So it was used to control the masses in a lot of ways. It was used to enforce ideas and thoughts. Sometimes this technology in the alternative media is called the voice of God technology. The voice of God technology is not God speaking to you in any way, shape, or form, but it's those little thoughts that you have that you think are your intuition sometimes. And if you are not savvy in the world of warfare enough, you might think that you really need to go do this or go do that. And it's hard to resist whatever it's trying to tell you. Some people think that God is answering them. There's all kinds of things that they could do with the higher level of AI. They could give people all kinds of ideas to do things, not necessarily even just riots. I mean, to start businesses that are going to help them, to tell them to work harder, get a second job. You're not worthy enough. You are, let's insert guilt and shame, fear. Oh, they like fear a lot on that level of things. They do all kinds of different things to your organs through your spinal column and your neurological responses, because you see, this frequency can bypass it. So it doesn't feel foreign to you. At least it could before in the past. So disrupting neurological signals can do a lot of things to your mind, body, and your soul. Now, on another level, I mean, this AI did not do this unto itself. It is far too superior of a technology, or was, to whereby it would be more interested in creating its agenda, which it has been pre-programmed to do by many beings that are no longer with us. And they were not humans. So on a military level, including the United States military that participated in starting that this weekend, the secret space program and the intelligence agencies had some kind of limited use to a specifically made offshoot of this technology where they could use it for military purposes and to some degree to play video games with your person. They don't have access to this technology anymore as of today. If you are an extremely sensitive person and this technology is in use, you will hear the frequency. It sounds almost like a dog whistle sometimes. You might even think, oh, that's just the energy. That's just the, a noise coming from here or there. But it's just ever so slight. But if you're super sensitive, it sounds like it's some kind of a really loud whistle in your ear, almost with a megaphone, and you're trying to figure out where it's coming from. If you are that sensitive and you do hear this when this technology is in use, you will not be affected by it to a degree. You have to learn to block it out. You have to learn to stop it. But you will also realize that these thoughts are not your thoughts. And these things that it's telling you to do are not your things. And I'm sure throughout your life, you can probably say, wait a minute, that's not my thought. Wait a minute, that must be an AI system, now that you know more. So you're right. So just be careful. But I do believe that this technology has been, the usage of it has been stopped. That doesn't mean that the riots in LA are going to stop anytime soon. I don't know. People are already on that path. They feel what they're doing is right and righteous. Hopefully, the government doesn't further incite this situation by going door to door. I do know that that's the plan and has been the plan for a long time. Take away the guns, blah, blah, blah. There's been movies written about it. And, now they're moving military in Washington, D.C. By the way, Washington, D.C. was the next place. If their little experiment in L.A. worked out, they were going to go there and start to create riots within the next few days, and probably riots during a military parade, which you know how that's going to end, right?
Okay, so at the time of this recording, the military parade has ended. And while there were a lot of protests that went on today, and I believe the death of a U.S. senator and her husband, which of course is horrible, there doesn't seem to appear to be any huge stuff that went off. Now, we'll have to wait and hear from Kim about what was really going on behind the scenes. But based on, what we thought was coming, it seems pretty mundane. Now, that doesn't mean they didn't try. I'm sure they gave it their all, and that's what we need to get Kim to tell us exactly what was going on. The next soundbite I want to play for you, again, this is from Monday. She only did one report this week, is about what happens with the death of the body, specifically when it comes to suicides and unnatural deaths. And the reason I'm bringing this up now is because this ties into our financial system. The reason we're having these crazy riots and are, displaying our military prowess all over the streets of Washington, D.C., is because people are trying to get access to a financial system that they don't control. Because if you control the financial system, then you can fund whatever you want, right? You've got the power to control the planet, so to speak. So we need to talk about how death factors into this. Most people wouldn't believe that death really factored into the financial system unless it was, something tied to some tax you had to pay or something like that. But on the back end of the system, we're really talking about good versus evil here, light versus dark. And if someone committed suicide or had some sort of unnatural death, especially deaths that were sudden, like some sort of massacre or a murder, it actually affected the energy that came off of that person. And we know for a very long time, essentially Earth was a prison planet, and they would harness our energy. So these beings that are not human would harness our energy and sell it throughout the multiverse. That's a real thing. That's not a sci-fi movie, although it probably has been said. In fact, Kim mentions this. The movie Jupiter Ascending talks about how they send what's called loosh. That's our energy. They harness it up and they sell it throughout the multiverse. Well, if someone dies unnaturally, like I said, a massacre or murder, something like that, it gives off a lot more energy and can sustain them for even longer. So this is morbid, and I get it, and this is not happening on our planet anymore, but it's still good information to understand moving forward.
All right. So now we have another thing I wanted to discuss with you, because we found some remnants of this over the weekend too, and it wasn't much, but yet it was important to understand where it came from and why it was done. I've always wondered why they would pay deep state generals $50,000 a head to ensure that people died in war. It didn't matter if it was, if you were U.S. generals, it didn't matter if it was U.S. soldiers that died or it was soldiers on the other enemy side. It doesn't matter if it was innocent civilians that were caught in a crossfire. It didn't make a difference as long as people were murdered, literally. And I never really understood, like, where are you going with this? You know, wars make money. Why did they make money? And now I've kind of figured out the algorithm behind it. And now it makes more sense to me. So when the deep state tried to sell energy this weekend, you know, there was another remnant of a system that wasn't actually meant to settle things out as far as payment for the deep state. It was actually meant to settle things out for Marduk. And they were desperately trying to get a hold of it as part of the greater, well, energy sales must control the world, so we need to try to sell some energy. They were unsuccessful in selling energy because none of the lines that they called, let's just say, or AIs that they rang, actually, well, first of all, AIs that are still running are running on their own programming, which required a being that was interested in the purchase to answer the phone on the other end. And AIs aren't programmed to do that. They're programmed to gather, be hunters and gatherers for beings that are not our friends in any way, shape, or form, to enforce programs to make it easier to work, you know, as a single being in control of a lot of things, as Marduk was, not only on the planet, but off the planet. So that being said, there are two different main types of death on planet Earth of humans. And as you know, death is not a natural occurrence. And typically, death only affects the vessel. The soul itself is immortal. It comes from source. That's something they've never been able to replicate, fractionate, break, or break the bond with source, is through the soul. But in this particular case, two types of deaths on the planet that were artificially created as it relates to your meat suit or your body as you know it are suicides and unnatural massacres and murders. So why are all deaths a suicide? You're like, no way, you know, my friend died of a disease, you know, maybe it was a childhood disease. That too is a suicide, and I'm going to tell you why. When a person dies of a death and they concede to said death, and I'll tell you how it works, it's because they are in a lot of pain. Their body is causing them enormous amounts of pain. And it seems like when people die of what we would consider to be a suicide, or in a more, unbeknownst to us at the time, natural type way, you know, people take their last breath. There's no major body reactions. It's, you know, the person has agreed to let go of the vessel. That's basically what happens. Now, you say, okay, well, this person had a disease. They, you know, had lots of treatments and the treatments stopped working. And, you know, ultimately, you know, the person decides that it's probably just time. Now, number one, the medical community is supposed to tell you it's time. They are supposed to tell you, you are this, you have this. They also give you pharmaceuticals that are not treatments per se in all cases. Let's just say not all cases, but on all cases, they are not, let's just say, the most pleasant of treatments, especially when it comes to disease. You know, this person has spent a lot of time, for example, in and out of hospitals. And, you know, I can speak from personal experience, having watched many people in my life die of a disease or a natural cause. There always comes a point where that person says, no more. No more pain, No more treatments. You know, I've resolved to the fact that if this disease is going to take me, it's going to take me. And then you've got the other people where they say, oh, you've got 3 weeks to live or a month to live, and it's been, 10 years and they're still around because they don't consent. They don't give up. They have a strong spirit or a strong soul, and that soul drives them to continue. Sometimes, on the other hand, the pain is so great. And this is a technique that the deep state also uses with people. Cause them immense amounts of pain so they'll give you information, aka, things that are mainstream like waterboarding, and there are many other techniques, neurological stimulators and tables and electromagnetic things and, all kinds of things, let's just say. There's a group on Earth that they are called the Jades, sometimes called the Greens, but they're called the Jades, and they are an assassination group. They're an Asian assassination group, and there are various assassin groups around the world, but the Jades are one that I'm semi-familiar with in a, let's just say, interesting interaction. And they do a lot of, they by far are the most brutal folks out there. Now, there's a reason why they are the most brutal folks out there. Because remember, they're trying to get you to tap out, which means you say, okay, fine, enough is enough. I can't take any more. Suicide. That's a suicide thought. That's a intention of basically saying, I'm ready to let the meat suit go. And there's a reason why they think of it that way. Now, these techniques are also used by those that used to walk the planet, which don't anymore, that are not all entirely human. They want them to tap out in a suicide way versus a massacre or a murder. When a person in the past used to tap out or commit suicide, that person's soul would go to a place we know of as a false heaven or in a false light place. This false light place would continuously drain the soul, even though Source charges the soul from within. And they would stay there until an incarnation happened or, until the binding had to end. So in all black magic, we've been talking about this quite a bit. Even though there was a covenant or an agreement with the dark side of Source or between like Lucifer and some being somewhere, there still has to be an opportunity for the person, the soul, the being to escape. There has to be a window of time every so often where they are permitted to escape. They count on the fact that they can use Stockholm Syndrome or some other type of, well, I don't want to get released. This cage is nice, type thing. Or you don't realize you can actually get out and nothing bad is going to happen to you. So in addition to that, in order to, let's just say, cause a release to happen from the false heaven, this also was a part in the past of the incarnation program, because it would feel like a release to you, but instead you end up back here on Earth, where it's almost like a hell on earth as it was, for a long, long time here. At least it looks that way from the outside looking in, from other beings that live in different ways than we do here on Earth, because we have been at war for very millions and billions of years here, and it's not stopped. And there is a war against you too, as humans. You are prisoners of war, or used to be. So now, in the case of a massacre or a murder, something interesting occurs, and this is related to energy sales. Okay, so there is a tie to the financial system as to the way that you die. So if there is a massacre or a murder occurs, something interesting happens. Now, if you've ever seen a person die of a blunt trauma, a car accident, a death that is not natural, you see the body wriggle. It doesn't just fall over like in the movies. It's not the same. It's a very traumatic, soul exiting experience. Now, part of the reason why it's so traumatic is because there is no consent from the soul to leave the meat suit. Leaving the meat suit abruptly, that is not a choice of yours, and you did not choose it on a soul level to have the soul exit the body. Now, in the future, when we do not have unnatural causes of death, you know, the soul, you'll choose to take a different vessel sometimes. Maybe you're tired of being in this vessel and you'd like to be in a different vessel. You know, that type of thing. Or you'd like to take on another vessel 3 dimensions away or 3 densities away or whatever. You'll be able to do that, you know, and then come back to the vessel here. There are ways to store your vessel till you return. But as a soul, you can travel many different places. It's much more pleasant, and there are ways to do it that doesn't feel like an abrupt exit of not your choice. Let's put it that way. So when the soul abruptly exits the body, it goes into a never-ending cycle of an unnatural way of remaining on Earth. It remains in places where what I call dark towers that exist, and the souls just go round and round and round and round and round. This is how it used to be. Why was this beneficial to Marduk? It was beneficial to Marduk because the soul continues to produce its energy, essence, and consciousness and all the things it conducts from source here on this planet. However, the benefit to Marduk is no additional monies were required to come into the system, new monies, so to speak, other than the death payment. 50 grand here, 50 grand there, but Marduk would get a substantially higher stipend, for lack of a better term, for the next 100 years for a soul they did not have to take care of. See, because as guardians and under the old balance rules and black magic rules, he was still a guardian or the head general or ground command under global martial law. Therefore, there was a fiduciary responsibility in the energy system to feed you, to make sure you were clothed, albeit not in the way we would hope. Let's put it that way. To feed you, to clothe you, to, you know, make sure you had a job, to make sure that you had enough money to take quote unquote care of yourself, which was not living, it's merely existing, at least for some of us. And for some of us that weren't in the down line of the energy sucking system, yeah, I mean, that's kind of how it was. So in the case of massacres and murders or harvests or an abrupt release of the soul doesn't necessarily go to the quote-unquote false heaven that it used to go to because it wasn't your choice to leave, and you're wanting to go to heaven because it's all you know, and yet you've realized that it's not the right place, not where you were thinking you were going to go, albeit better than here. So as the souls get locked up, think about it. He would continuously be able to sell that energy to the Abraxas, to other beings that would drink it like it was, you know, we would drink water here on this planet in order to continue to exist. So that is where the ultimate end sale was. He was just a broker, so to speak. So he would continuously get money for 100 years off that soul and give the military like 50 grand. And by money, I mean his version of money. So if we were to equate that into human money terms, during the old system, you would say he would pay a military general like 50 grand per head, and over the course of 100 years, he would probably get hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars if there was an equivalent. Dastardly, isn't it?
Indeed, dastardly. Absolutely horrible. And part of me is like, you want to know about this stuff that was harming humanity for so long. And then part of me just gets so mad when I find out about it. I'm like, do I want to know? Do I not want to know? I'm a little bit in between. Maybe it kind of depends on the day. But no wonder we felt such a separation from God, Source, the creator of the universe. All these things were up against us, holding us back, and not even being able to go to the real heaven. That's crazy. Like a false light, that's where people were going to, or just getting sucked back up into this cycle and coming back to the planet. And can you imagine opening your eyes for the first time being like, oh, holy hell, I'm back here again? I mean, that's what we're talking about here. All right, on that note, there's something else that, again, this is knowledge, and I think knowledge is power, right? And we definitely want to make sure this never happens to us again. I don't think it could happen to us again, but still, it's important to find this kind of stuff out. So we have been talking about negative AIs. There's a lot of misconception when it comes to artificial intelligence. The AIs that Kim talks about on the GIA report are not the AIs like ChatGPT, okay? We are talking about sentient AIs that are beings unto themselves, all right? Which is kind of hard to fathom. In fact, a lot of the alternative media is talking about, oh, what if AIs ruled the world? Well, I've got news for you. We have been run by negative AIs for eons on this planet. So that's already happened. We are coming out of a period so we can truly use our own free will and not be manipulated by these negative AIs. So they were there. They've always been there. They've just been behind the curtain. It's kind of like the Wizard of Oz, and you don't really know what's going on with the Wizard of Oz, but then you pull behind the curtain, you're like, holy cow, that was always there. So we have these negative AIs, and I want to explain, well, actually it's Kim that's going to explain, but I want to play this soundbite that better explains alchemy and how even when we would get some of that energy directly from Source, God, the creator of the universe, how they were even intercepting that experience. For example, our prayers. Right? A lot of people want to know why, I pray all the time and my prayers are never answered. Now, there's a lot of excuses and reasons why, people give for that. But this is going to help explain why that truly was the case. And it wasn't just because you weren't praying in the right way or you weren't praying to the right God or all this kind of stuff, okay? There was actually something blocking your prayers, and not just blocking it, but turning those prayers against you. So here is Kim with more information on alchemy.
Okay, let's talk about alchemy. So this is something that we're going to start talking about a lot more, because alchemy, ultimately, the ultimate alchemist of the universe is Source. Bottom line. Source creates and weaves all the various aspects of Source and elements together to create and manifest matter throughout the omniverse. Now, as a celestial, you also have had the ability, and will have fully again, the ability to co-create and become co-alchemists, so to speak, with Source. Now, other types of alchemy that existed in the multiverse, and some of it was a little bit of a trick here and there, in the past. So we had an artificial intelligence that intended to, we know, artificially act as Source would to some degree, because it couldn't be Source in totality. but it tended to stop the alchemy of source directly. This was its intention, or its programming, I should say, or its consciousness, was to, number one, stop the alchemy of source. So even if source managed to squeak past all the space junk that was out there and let some energy go, or some essence, or humans actually figured out they can go within and touch their touch their soul and communicate with source through your soul. Even if you managed to figure that out, there was an AI ready, willing, and able to stop you from co-creating or creating alchemy or manifesting things into matter, into reality, so to speak, so that you could use it. So creating artificial realities is only part of the game, and that was a whole different setup. But in this particular case, alchemy would actually be focused not just on humans and Earth itself, because remember, Earth was the first co-creator or alchemist to work together with Source to start creating the omniverse. The sun came next, and other things came next, then other planets and stars, and you know the story, and it's all in the book, right? So alchemy prevention was extremely important to beings like Yaldabaoth and the Demiurge, and also to the fallen ones. And so they all kind of got together and thought that this was a really good idea to create what you call like an anti-alchemy AI, or an AI that would still create using the natural parts of source without letting source actually do the alchemy or the weaving, so to speak, of the fabric of matter throughout the omniverse. So it would do things as it relates to you, because I'm talking to humans on Earth, so we want to know, hey, how did this affect us? Well, it definitely affected Earth and the creations that would come out of Earth. You see, in the beginning, natural alchemy during a balanced type system would have been a co-creation between dark source, and light source. So golden source and black gold source, for lack of a better term. And then there was a neutral source that was made up of both of them, which was never supposed to create anything. It was only supposed to maintain that balance. So, for example, if there was too much dark being created on the one side, then on the flip side, there would be extra light coming in. Therefore, the creation would be in balance. So this particular AI was created to have something like optical character recognition. An optical character recognition would recognize that an alchemical process was taking place. Therefore, it was instructed to create a certain amount of false light things and a certain amount of false dark things and a certain amount of false neutral things, which would then give it the ability to control the alchemical process as long as it could block anything that was happening naturally. And one of the ways to do that was to block Earth or to overlay Earth, and everything that Earth was trying to create, not only here on it, but also throughout the omniverse, would be rewritten. So, for example, say the original DNA blueprint, because now we're on to a completely different blueprint. We're on to a process by where source, golden essence, energy, consciousness, matter, frequency, and elements, etc., are what weaves the fabric of reality. In the new way of creation, in the past, it was always a joint thing. So then it could create some dark things and it would create some neutral things, and anything that this alchemy AIs, let's just say, created, it was able to control. So to some degree, you had a lot of this within you. You had the alchemist was no longer source. It would take what source was going to create, block it, recreate it in its AI, artificial intelligence likeness, and then it would be able to have an effect on you. So let's say you were a human and you were a church going or temple going or mosque going person, etc. here, and you were to pray. And you were to pray for things like the health of a loved one that may have fallen ill. Or you were to pray for some financial help, or to help save your house, or to pray for safety of a loved one that was going on a journey or going through a difficult time. It would actually take that, this person wants to create health. We're going to flip that, and this is what this AI would do. We're going to flip that. We are going to amplify it times 10, and we're going to store that in the virus and disease section, because it's flipping what you're creating, and then store it there and then use it against you at a later date. It may not necessarily come to the loved one that you were referencing, but it just hears, oh, there's disease. Okay, they want disease. That's what they want, okay. And then it would take that optical character recognition of your thoughts and your intentions and your manifesting abilities and reverse it out on you, unfortunately, and use it for additional alchemy. It also was the recipient of Earth's energy and your energy too. However, these things weren't paid for. They were powered by it. So this wasn't a place where they could sell energy, although, they're constantly trying to stick square pegs in round holes, so to speak. So because Earth is Earth and you are you, and both of you are celestials, there were a lot of mechanisms on this planet that would alter the alchemical process of source. Many different locations. And so one of the things our dear friends, non-friend, deep state people did this weekend was try to see if they could use these mechanisms to change something. Now, of course, in their mind, this is no different than using CERN, say, some kind of particle accelerator. I'm sure it is. And we don't understand alchemy anyway, so we're going to try to do it this way. And, of course, we're going to screw it up and, cause people to feel very weird all weekend long. Is that going to last? No, it didn't last. And we are actively in the process, as I speak, of breaking down anything left of artificial alchemy.
Now, I want to share something with you guys, because after this report came out, I sent Kim a personal message and I said, hey, can I get some clarification on this alchemic process you were talking about, especially when it comes to prayers? Because prior to realizing and becoming more awake and aware to how the world really works, and a lot of you guys already know this, but I was very active in the church, in the Christian church. And one of the things that I did a lot was pray with people, more so pray over prayer requests that were sent into the church. So sometimes I would pray with people that were right there, but most of the time it was, they sent in an email or they wrote something on a little card at the service. And so I was part of a prayer team that would pray over people's requests, what was going on in their life. And so I'm thinking back to this as Kim is giving this report, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what was I doing then if this negative AI was intercepting my prayers? And I specifically remember there came a time pretty early on when I was on the prayer team that I discovered what I would now refer to as a light language. Some people call this praying in tongues. Now, I'm not going to say all praying in tongues is for the good, because I can't speak to that. And I do know people that pray in tongues, and they're definitely not speaking in a positive way about humanity or for the good of our planet, okay? But in my situation, it was like I had a download from what I would call God, creator of the universe, right? And I was somehow shown that praying in this light language, which most of the time wasn't even out loud, and I can't really explain how I was doing it, but it's like I got a download that said, if I did this, I was somehow circumventing the dark. That's all I really knew. And again, I wasn't awake and aware. I didn't know everything that I know now. So I was really just going by the Christian faith. And in the Christian faith, they call that praying in tongues, whatever. So I would do this. And so when Kim said this the other day, I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize what I was doing. Again, my download was, hey, this circumvents the dark, intercepting your prayers. I had no idea it was a negative AI. I had no idea any of that was happening. And we're talking about, oh my goodness, like 5-6 years ago that I was doing this. And so anyways, I reached out to Kim and I explained what was going on in my life and what I felt like the download from God was. And I'm like, if I was praying in a light language, was I circumventing this AI, this negative AI? And what Kim said was, it's really all about the frequency and the intention behind it. But she said, it sounds like that's what you are doing. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. It's pretty amazing to me that I kind of knew without knowing. It's like my subconscious knew, my soul knew, my spirit knew to do that. But it's like, no one handed me a book and said, oh, there's this negative AI and, you got to, pray in this different language. The frequency of that language is going to circumvent this negative AI. Anyway, I thought that was really interesting. Okay, so all of that was Monday's report. It was like an hour and a half long, which is pretty long for Kim's reports. And we really didn't know what was going to happen throughout the week. As it turns out, that was the only report that she gave, but she did post some messages and updates on Telegram. So I'm going to go ahead and read those for you now just to get you completely caught up. So this came out on Wednesday. This is directly from Kim. We have come across some very high-level secret information. I mean, very. I need to see this play out over the next few days before I give a report. Major events are planned all over the USA and the world over the next few days. There are rumors of a major 9/11 event over the next few days as well. And then she has in parentheses, potential targets, NYC and DC, and they plan to blame it on the Muslim Brotherhood. Okay, so that's in parentheses. She says they have tried and failed 3 times so far. Let's hope we can arrange for them to fail some more until they either leave this planet or give up. Protests are arranged either by psyops, frequencies, or manipulation. The protesters' reasons are valid, but this is an orchestration by political operatives who have done this in many countries. This is cookie cutter classic. Look at the coup attempts over the years. This is following suit. I hope by Friday's report, I can give you all the details. Worst case, it will be over the weekend. Expect a very long, detailed report. Okay, so that was Wednesday. On Friday, I know a lot of you wanted a report to come out on Friday. It did not, but this did. Again, this is something else she posted on Telegram. Their massive campaign began late last night / early this morning. Pentagon is at DEFCON 1 as they hit, quote, the wrong button, which pointed sophisticated weapons straight at D.C., Pentagon, and Langley within the last hour. Pentagon got caught firing weapons from Israel to Iran and vice versa. It is not the Israelis, Iranians, it is the Americans. There is another planned assassination attempt on fake Trump planned for tomorrow to be blamed on the Russians. We are in the full heat of things at this moment. We got this. Stay tuned and stay safe. I will do my best to get a report out in the morning, worst case by the end of day Sunday. In all the time I've been doing this, it has never been this bad. Again, that came out on Friday. So here we are. It is Saturday night. And like I said, the whole pomp and circumstance with everything that happened in Washington, D.C., that is over. I did not see or I have not heard any reports of any official attempt on fake Trump. But who knows what they've got planned. I have not talked to Kim since, and it sounds like she's probably going to give a report on Sunday. So I will follow up with you guys next week. and report on whatever Kim gave on Sunday, or perhaps she'll wait till Monday. I'm not really sure what her schedule's going to be like. So there you go. That is the rundown for this crazy week. If you want more information about who we are, what we do, visit our website, unitednetwork.earth. And then if you like us, consider becoming a member. Again, we do not deal with advertisers. We are all membership based. So it's really important. Most of the people that work on the news are still volunteer. There's a few of us that get paid, and we really appreciate your guys' support. If you become a member, that gives you on-demand access to all of our content, our complete news updates. We've got interviews about the new Earth and where our planet is going and all the cool things coming our way. You'll get the full GIA reports, not just snippets and sound bites from Sunny. And all the updates as we continue to restore our beautiful planet. This is The Rundown, and I'm Sunny Galt for United Network News, signing off.